I'm Wesley Alley. You're watching Mr. Death Breath.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my channel. We are here with the one and only Wesley Alley. You may know him from The Voices, Sock Monster, and Good Girl. The Voices is out now on Hulu and on streaming services. It stars Shaye and Amanda Markowitz. How you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Great. Okay, so let's start let's start chronicling some of the things you've done, okay? So in 2011, you worked on Reanimated. What was that experience like?
Reanimated, I just graduated film school, and I directed like a bunch of projects with friends and stuff like that, but I wanted to like make my first sort of project. And so me and a buddy of mine, one of my actors, Brian Chenworth, and I had been talking about this like, I don't know, zombie comedy idea for years and years while we were in film school together. And so I started cycling through like ideas of what I could make this short film about, and like, I really wanted to make like my first like professional like short film, now that I was graduated from film school. So I landed on this idea going back through all my old notes and stuff, and I was like, oh well, this will be funny. And so it's sort of like this zombie comedy that like really is kind of very self-aware that it's a film, and it's sort of focuses on perspective. So like it jumps back and forth into imaginations. Like one character will be like, oh well what if this happened, and then we jump into his imagination, and then the other guy's like, no, it'd be more like this, and we jump into his imagination, and then there's flashbacks and stuff like that. So and like each of the two guys remember something differently. So it's like we flash back into one guy's perspective.
That's funny.
He's killing zombies, and flashback to the other guy's perspective, and it's him in an adult-sized diaper standing there with a pacifier in his mouth. So it was fun. It was like my first, endeavor outside of film school. I directed lots of like little things in film school and before film school and stuff like that, but that was like the first like, all right, this is gonna launch me into fame, attempt.
Almost.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we jumped to 2017, okay? You did the excellent Sock Monster. First off, guys, I had the privilege of being able to review it. I absolutely loved it. It was a little bite-sized short, maybe about less than 3 minutes. It had Derek Mears, the Jason from the last Jason movie. How did you go about coming up with the concept? Tell me that first, because I have quite a few questions.
So my production company is actually called Sock Monster Productions, and it dates like way back into like 2001 when I was going to college with some friends. And we had this joke about there was a pile of socks, and it just became an inside joke about how it was the sock monster, and blah blah blah. And so like it just kept coming back with all of my like friends. And then 10 years later, I was trying to come up with a production company, and I came up with Sock Monster Productions. And so then years later, over the years, it like kept becoming a reoccurring joke with other people. And like I had a like documentary spoof script where like this guy was looking for where the lost socks go in the dryer, and at the end of this like sort of spoof, he like comes up with runs into a monster that basically is a culmination of all the lost socks. And it was funny, but it was like this like sort of mockumentary thing, which isn't really my style. So like nothing ever happened with it. And then I have a directing mentor, Darren Lynn Bousman, who's the director of like, Saw 2, 3, 4, 5, the new Spider.
He made the best one.
Yeah. So he went to the same film school as I did. And then when I moved out to Los Angeles, we sort of started working together, and then eventually became friends. And then, I've been helping him on his projects, and he's been helping me on my projects, and sort of like mentoring me as a director. And I had wrote this like 3-minute, like 3-page, like super silly, super scary short film about, a sock monster. And I just happened to send it to him. And then like a year later, we're having coffee, and he was like, what's going on with your directing career? And, it was just sort of like stale. I've written some scripts, and I'm, pushing stuff, but as an unrepped director, I just just trying to create and trying to keep growing and learning. And and then he was like, well, do you still have that short script about the sock monster? And I was like, oh yeah, I do. And he's like, well, we should do that. That was super funny. And I was like, all right. So I, kind of started pulling it together. And I had just met Derek Mears on the set, actually of Twin Peaks, the third season of Twin Peaks. I was working on as a crew member, and Derek Mears and I had a bunch of mutual friends, and so I just met him and reached out to him, and he was like, "Oh, hey, yeah, it was so great meeting you. Like, I'd love to read your script." And he read it and was like, "Oh, this is amazing. I'm so into it." And like, so he was like super friendly and super willing to help me. And then Darren had worked with Brianna Evigan, who was the star of like a couple of the Step Up films, Sorority Row, and like a bunch of stuff. And Darren had worked with her on Mother's Day and The Devil's Carnival. And he was like, "Oh, let me introduce you to some people." And so he introduced me to Brianna, and she was like, "Oh, I think the idea sounds amazing. Let's do it." And so the next thing you know, I had these like, super amazing, super well-known actors, that were like, willing to do this little project with me. And so we shot it and released it, and it was great. Like, I love it. It's one of like my favorite things that we shot. It was also really, really hard. And we shot it all in one day. And then I spent 3 days cleaning blood out of my garage.
Wow, but it was worth it.
It was totally worth it. But it was.
You know what? It kind of reminds
me of. The cleanup was longer than the shooting.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me a little bit of you remember in Home Alone when he's afraid to go down to the basement?
Yeah.
Because the furnace turns on. It's like you managed to capture the like the childlike imagination of that, but you still kept this intensity and really uncomfortable setting. The way you set, I guess, the cinematography, it just had this tension throughout it, and it was so well done, really well done.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I like it.
Are you ever going to expand on it? Because there's so much more you can do. I mean, you can turn it into a franchise if you wanted to. I'm sure of it.
I talked about it actually, about making another short, sort of to follow up on it. I'm not sure if it really lends itself well to a like a feature version. I think it's a little too like, silly. But I had talked about it with a buddy of mine about like, oh, we should do another one. That would be like sort of fun, like just kind of having this like reoccurring sort of like, 3 minute, 4 minute, short films that keep returning. So we'll see, maybe.
Yeah, it also kind of reminded me a little bit of Wes Craven's Day. It kind of had that element where it's like you touch on that primal fear of the unknown. Like, you're afraid of going in the basement, you're afraid of going in your closet, you're afraid of the dark, you're afraid of things you hear, things you might see. And I love that you touched on that because it hits in a really personal way where just, everything you're afraid of, it comes up and you bring it up beautifully in that film. Sock Monster's fantastic. You did a good job.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Right. Okay, so 2018, you made Good Girl. That was your first collaboration with Amanda Markowitz and Bradley. So how'd you go about making Good Girl?
Amanda and Brad and Victoria actually helped me produce Sock Monster as well.
Oh.
And then Good Girl, we actually just finished shooting the voices, and we were about to like start post-production and all that other stuff. And we had such a great time shooting the voices. Amanda like reached out. She was like, "Hey, I want to make this other project. It's this thing that I've been thinking about for a long time." So she kind of pitched me the idea of, this couple that falls in love and then, finds out that they're celebrating their love, and sort of like, you figure out that their love is born out of something, super, super sinister and dark. And I was like, oh man, that's such a messed up story. I was like, let's do it.
Yeah.
So we started as we started post on the voices, we started Bradley Fowler, who wrote the voices, started writing the script for Good Girl. And then he and I sort of collaborated back and forth on writing it, off this idea that he and Amanda had first come up with. And then we just sort of launched right into it and started shooting it while we were doing post on the voices. And it's a short film, so we were able to like wrap it up and knock it out, at the same time and get it out sort of before the voices was out. That way we kind of had, film festivals and different reviewers like yourself and, whatever, who had seen a collaboration with us and sort of had something to like base on, so that when we release the voices, we could, hopefully get more of a positive outreach, or like people willing to check it out because we collaborated together already.
Yeah, that was really well done. That twist at the end, it's like it almost seemed like a genuine relationship, and you're like, wait, what? And you're like, oh my gosh, and you're like, hey, time to go. I'm like, no. It was just like it was really unsettling. Well done, and of course, Amanda Markowitz is fantastic. My follow-up question: how did you get the wonderful Zach Warden? I remember him from Titus, and also from Freddy vs. Jason. He's fantastic.
So I watched, Freddy vs. Jason, of course, but I watched way back when it first came out. I don't even remember when it came out, but Resident Evil came out, and he plays a character in Resident Evil.
He's the Russian guy, right?
Yeah, and I didn't recognize him, but I liked his character a lot, and I was like, I am gonna work with that guy someday. I just loved his character. It was like my favorite part of the film. And then like, I don't know, I have this like list of actors and stuff that I like would love to work with one day, just from silly little roles like that or whatever. And then, a couple of years later, or several years later, I saw Transformers, and I'm like, that's that guy. And he was in Transformers, and I was like, oh man, I need to work with this guy. So he's just been on my list. And we went into casting, and we reached out to, like, I had phone calls with Devin Sawa.
Oh, he's awesome.
I had Joe Anderson was like actually attached to do it for a while. He was in like the Crazies remix.
Okay, yeah.
His character in the Crazies remake was like another character that I was like, I'm gonna work with him one day. And he actually starred in Darren Bousman's Abattoir. So Darren reached out and connected us, but his work visa, because he's not an American citizen, wouldn't allow him to work on the SAG short feature contract. So we just kept looking, and it was like a couple of month casting process of trying to find someone to play this part. And then I just reached out to Zach personally and was like, hey, you don't know me, but this is what I'd love to do. I'm a big fan of yours from Resident Evil and blah, blah, blah. And he responded, he wrote back. And so the two of us just sort of started talking on email for a while. And then we had a couple of phone calls. And then I showed him a bunch of, I showed him Sock Monster and some other, Crypt TV short films that I have done and stuff like that. And eventually he was like, let's have coffee. And I was like, all right, cool.
Right on.
So we had coffee, and I introduced him to Amanda. And he was like, all right, let's do it. I think the script is great. And, so like we had a long casting process. And then I just reached out to Zach, like personally, like, cause going through a casting director is so hard, and going through agents and managers. And, so some of the times you're pitching these things to agents and managers, and you don't even know if they're like talking to their client about it at all or anything. And Zach was just super cool. And like, he's like, we'll have to run everything through my agent or my manager and stuff. And so we still ended up having to go through like his representation, but he was just like so willing to like speak with me about it and get the ball rolling. So I knew that he was actually interested. And then, I was able to show him some other work that I'd done and been like, like, this is what we're really trying to do. And he thought the script was creepy and crazy and cool. And, and I think he was a little bit flattered that I was such a fan of his character from Resident Evil.
Yeah.
But he was great. It was awesome to work with Zach.
I can't imagine anyone else playing that role, because like you notice his mannerisms. He seems like cool, collected, and charming, but then like the light will cast on his face, and he almost look like, like he almost look demonic, like the way his eyebrows shadow comes off his face. He just took like an ethereal figure, it's just very strange. Such a good job. Okay, so 2020, here we are. We're at the voices. You have megastar Lynn Shaye. You have the wonderful Amanda Markowitz. You have Bradley Fowler, Brendan Sexton, who's from Empire Records, Shoplifter, Warren. Okay, so let's talk about it. Okay, first off, my first question. There's all these moments between Victoria Matlock and Amanda Markowitz. You can just feel the tension. What was that like? Like, did they just turn on and become intense in that scene and turn it off? Or was it just a constant tension throughout the shoot?
No, they're like best friends. So
wow. Okay.
So it was like a constant like turn off, turn on. They were so amazing as actresses. Like it was it was actually like astonishing to watch. But they're two very, very, very talented actresses. So the voices came about with Bradley, Amanda, and Victoria are part of this production company with the executive producer Andy Weisenberg, Three Tails Productions, and they had made a movie together called Love Meet Hope, which is like a romantic comedy.
I heard about it. Yeah,
and it's good. It's really good. Like I definitely recommend checking it out. And so they sort of made that together as like their first movie, and then kind of released it, and then so The Voices was sort of like their production's follow-up. So Bradley wrote this like in mind for Amanda and Victoria to star in. So it's like sort of written for them. And then the two of them dived so deep into the characters and like the disease and like, working with Brad and I, that it was just astonishing to watch how talented they were. And like everybody who watches the film is just like blown away at how amazing they were or are as actresses and how talented it was. But it was really astonishing to watch them turn it on and turn it off and like oh, we're best friends at lunch, and then
it has to be so weird,
and like laughing and joking in the makeup room, and then like screaming at each other holding axes a couple of minutes later. It was pretty amazing. They're very talented women, for sure.
I love how Amanda and Victoria were the perfect yin and yang. It's funny, I have to tell you. So I'm watching the movie and I'm just sitting back. I'm like, all right, let's review this. Let's watch it. And then that scene happens at the beginning, and I'm like, oh gosh! I forgot I was watching a horror movie for a moment. And that scene was so jarring and so effective because usually movies don't start by slapping you in the face. There's always a little bit of a build up with like some piano melody or some atmosphere. But just the way you effectively pulled it off with Lynn Shaye, it was just so well done. And it's just good job.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So aside from the relationship with Victoria and Amanda, what was the shoot like? How long was it? What was the weather like? What was the cast like?
We shot for I think 18 like full shoot days, and then I think we had like 2 more that was just like me and the cinematographer and like a drone company, or like me and the cinematographer and my buddy who does car rigs, and like Amanda. Like we had like 2 days on top of that was just sort of like pickups and like specialty stuff. So basically 18 days. And the weather was, it's supposed to be cold and remote and like lonely, and like we kept, like cold and alone is like sort of like the theme of it, like of the feel of the movie. And when we were shooting it, it was like the LA rainy season, which is usually not.
That was shot in LA?
Yes, we shot in Fillmore, California. So
I thought you shot somewhere else. I'm like, they have to be like in Oregon or something. It's so beautiful. Like maybe Texas?
Just outside of LA.
Wow.
And it was the Los Angeles rainy season, which usually like isn't that rainy, but this year it was like the most rain LA had seen in like 20 years. And so like leading up to the shoot, like all during pre-pro, it was like super gloomy and super rainy. And then we started shooting and boom, it was like 80 degrees and super sunny. And so we were trying to shoot this like movie with them in like jackets and sweaters and like, feeling cold and like, and there was flowers blooming and, birds tweeting. So the weather was actually a challenging part. And when you watch the film, there's this big rope bridge, like a suspension bridge over this river. And then there's like a driveway to the house that goes like around the back, like over the river. And normally the river is just like a little trickle, so they just kind of drive through it up to the house. But because it had rained for like 4 months, it was like a full on like river. So we couldn't even drive up to the house. So everybody had to like load equipment and everything across that suspension bridge. So it was like all the like negative of the rain, but none of the like positive. Like we were like really hoping for that gloomy, like cloudy weather. And like as soon as we started shooting, it was like no more rain. Now it's going to be 90. But it all worked out, and like it still looks cold and alone, I think.
It looks so good, so you guys did a great job. By the way, also that ending really caught me off guard. And what caught me off guard was to the point that I didn't know if I was really seeing what I was supposed to see or if the narrator was becoming unreliable. And it wasn't until the end that I finally realized that what I was seeing was really what I was seeing. So you guys did a really good job with that. It was good.
Good. Yeah, we tried really hard to like the whole film, you know, goes in and out of reality so much to nightmares and to like, you know, we tried really hard to make it so you couldn't, where the audience was not really sure what was real and what was not real, you know, what was a make believe or a nightmare or, you know, or whatever. And the ending, we really wanted to push that mark. But it was actually a really challenging ending to the film, you know, without giving anything away. Like, it doesn't really end on the most happy, upbeat sort of ending, which is like always hard to swallow, especially in a movie that involves like basically only two like characters for most of the film. So like you're really involved with like these characters and really, you know, care about them, and then to have an ending that isn't necessarily the happiest is sort of a blow or a shock. And like we're really worried about that sort of like turning off the audience. But at the same time, the whole story like revolves around this, you know, pretty serious disease, and we tried really hard to like be true to that disease and like not make light of it and like, you know, make it a joke or anything. And so we didn't want it to come across like, oh, at the end everything just goes back to normal and everybody smiles and is happy and the, you know, this disease just works out, you know. And so like we tried really hard to like make it, you know, a good point, you know, period or exclamation point or whatever at the end of the story, and have the like, you know, the audience not, you know, feel like, you know, everything was just, oh, you know, everything just goes back to normal, you know, like, because it doesn't, you know. And I think it was pretty effective. Like, I really liked
100%.
the ending. You know, we premiered the film to a pretty packed, you know, theater, at the Hollywood Independent Film Festival, where Amanda actually won the Best Actress award. And the whole, like, basically the whole theater was like, "What?" at the end, like
Yeah.
totally shocked. So
Not surprised.
it feels pretty. It feels like it's accepted well. I hope.
It was a really, like you said, it's a punctuation, but you know what? Honestly, I think those are the best endings. So what was it like working with Lynn Shaye? How did you go about getting her on the project?
Lynn Shaye was amazing. You know, I'm a big fan of hers, just like most other horror fans. So Lynn Shaye was great. Working with her was amazing. She was actually another Darren Lynn Bousman connection, that where he had worked with her. And so when we were starting to look for people, we made pretty long lists of actors or actresses that we wanted to like bring in to like add some names to the project and like fill these other spots. And then so we sort of like worked through the list of talked about like every actor and like what they brought to the table and like how much we liked them. And you know, as the production company, we worked like discussed all the possibilities like endlessly for a long time. And then of course Lynn Shaye was everybody's top choice for that particular role. And so we ran about like reached out to her in like 4 or 5 different ways. Like we reached out with our casting director to her management, and then I asked Darren if he would put in a good word for me, and then I asked you know, a couple other directors who'd worked with her before if they would put in a good word for me. And then Darren Bousman's wife actually connected us on the phone together. And so her and I talked about the project, and we sent her the script, and she talked to her representation, and it all worked out to much to our happiness. And we're very lucky they did. She was amazing. She's very talented. You know, just an amazing person. She's got like a great heart, and she was like willing to, you know, jump in and help us on our project. And you know, she's put everything into it. Like she was like just jumped right in. It was amazing.
You used her effectively. What do you want as a director for the audience to feel?
Oh man, such a hard question. There's so many answers to that. Like,
Where's yours? Answer them all.
um, so my favorite movie is The Goonies. And I have like a very personal story as to like why. Like my parents had just gotten a divorce when it happened, and I think like in the fifth or sixth grade, or I was fairly young, but like old enough to know what was going on, but not really old enough to understand why my dad like couldn't live with us anymore. And um, my dad and I always watched the movies together. It was kind of like our thing. And so I remember sitting on his lap watching The Goonies, this show where like these kids sort of like take their action into their own hands. And, um, for that whole movie, I was just lost, and everything was fine. Like no troubles bothered me. And so like from that moment on, like I knew like what I wanted to do was make movies, and I wanted people to to feel that way and like have this sort of like entertainment, this distraction, and like release from all of their like personal issues and personal problems. And so first and foremost, those are the stories that I really gravitate to, which not necessarily The Voices doesn't really necessarily fit into that category, but as like a director and a filmmaker, I really like truly hope to like make a product that someone can like lose themselves in for an hour and a half or 2 hours or however long, and like just forget about their responsibilities in their life and just get lost in the story. And like that the job of a director is really to be a storyteller, and that was ultimately what I really love to do, and like really try to do in all of my projects. So first and foremost, that's what we really inspired to do the most. Um, I have to say that I did, I really inspired to scare people in this film as well. Like
Mission
we
accomplished.
definitely, we tried to like lean in and embrace the horror. That was sort of a conversation the production company has had, like, from the get-go. It was written like a horror film, and then, but it's also like this like thriller, and, so like terms like elevated horror and this shouldn't really be a horror, it should be a thriller, got tossed around a lot. But like ultimately we decided to lean into the horror and sort of like use it to our advantage, and like use characters like Shaye, and like use the disease has is such a background in like different elements of horror, and like different things in its own personal history, that like using those and like working them into the script you know helped push these like horror elements. And so like the idea of like scaring people really what was a big thing that we tried to do in the film, as well as we had a lot of talks about staying true to like how evil and powerful and like corrupt like this disease is, and how like real it is, and how like we can't just like make a mockery of it, and we can't turn it into like this you know horror element, and take all the humanity out of it and stuff like that. So we tried really hard to stay to that, and sort of like bring to light like what it does, and like how it affects people, and like that it really is a real a real thing that people go through, and it's not something that just exists in a horror film. So like we tried to like really toe that line of being respectful and being scary and telling a compelling story that like just would really entertain people.
You balanced it perfectly. Like you really
Thank
do
you.
see that it's about schizophrenia and it's about horror, and you don't make a mockery of any of it. It's almost like, it's funny what you did, to go back to the movie. Of course, it's like schizophrenia is an action, and the result is you get fear from it. So it almost feels like, it could be Amanda Markowitz's character internalizing everything and imagining things as a result of what she's experienced from her sister.
And Brad actually have connections to someone that's deeply affected by the paranoid schizophrenia. So that was like a constant like discussion throughout the making of the film, is like like how these what the people go through, and like how it affects them, and as well as making sure that we weren't doing something that would be offensive to that person, because they had like a real connection to the disease. It wasn't just something that Brad didn't just look up the information and write a script about it. It was something that was like affected his life, and like it had affected Amanda's life, and like they had, when they were talking about making this project and Brad writing it for that production, for their production company, like it was all like discussed about being respectful to it and like how it affected him personally. And so this is like a horror story and like a fun psychological thriller, but it's also something that like those two are like deeply connected to.
Okay, so my final question. First off, thank you for your time. I appreciate it, Wesley. You're amazing. I love your film. It was fantastic. So my final question is this. What's next? What are you going to make now? It's like you kind of like, this is like your debut feature. Like you're in the door. Like all you have to do is just walk into the giant vast room and make something else. So what's coming up? What's next?
I have a couple of things that we're about to start development before the world ended with this pandemic. Yeah. So those things kind of got shelved and put on hold, but I do have 2 different horror films that hopefully will become something, shortly after Hollywood starts working again. And I have a 15-minute proof of concept that I shot with an action movie producer.
Oh, wow.
To do like a summer blockbuster action film. And so we actually went out and shot this 14-minute proof of concept that like compiles the whole story, like packed into 14 minutes, and it's car chases and fights, and we flip a car, and then we have a big gunfight, and then it's drive a car through a wall, and like
sounds amazing,
another car chase. And so like we have this like really action packed proof of concept for like a really dark action film that I'm currently pitching. It's called 4-Hour Layover in Juarez. And I hope that takes traction, and that's sort of like the next big thing would be like a big action film. And then I have a couple other projects that like I have 2 scripts that I've written since being stuck at home. Well, I'm working on the second one right now. And then there's talks of a studio movie coming, but everything's just kind of on hold right now with Hollywood being shut down for the pandemic. So we'll see, but worst comes to worst, I'll make a Sock Monster Part 2.
Right on. Thank you so much for your time, Wesley.
Thanks for the interview.